Welcome to the deep dive. You send us your sources, and we're here to pull out the insights that really count, save you some time, bring some clarity.
That's the goal.
Today, we're diving into Michael Perlin's The Reunited States of America. It's a book that, well, it really tackles the intense polarization we're all feeling
Yeah.
and offers a vision for maybe bridging those gaps.
Exactly. Our listener, the learner, shared this one looking for a deeper grasp on why America is so divided right now and what paths forward might even exist.
Right.
So our job today is really to unpack Perlin's main arguments. We want to give you a clear, hopefully engaging overview of his analysis, his solutions.
Highlight some surprising connections, maybe,
Yeah.
and keep it focused.
Keep it focused, yeah. Avoid just drowning in information.
Okay, so let's get into it. Perlin's book, it digs into the history, doesn't it? Looking at forces behind where we are now.
It really does.
He talks about the rise of what he actually calls fascist rhetoric, the use of fear, conspiracy theories.
The weaponization of them, really.
Yeah, and how religion and nationalism can get twisted to divide people. And he draws these historical parallels. Rome, the Weimar Republic. That's pretty interesting stuff.
It is. And then the second half, Project Reunification, flips to a more hopeful note.
Right, the blueprint part.
Yeah. Laying out policy ideas, education, healthcare, environment, democratic reforms,
Mm.
all tied together with this idea of like a universal spirituality
Hmm.
and something he calls America's mystical destiny.
Which sounds intriguing. We'll have to unpack that.
Definitely. What's fascinating is how he weaves it all together. The history lessons about democracies falling apart, specific modern policy proposals, and this bigger spiritual frame.
So the mission for us today.
I think it's to boil down these complex ideas into insights you can actually use. We need to explore the warnings he gives about division, but also really understand his optimistic vision for a reunited America.
Okay. So, looking at both sides, the historical warnings and the proposed fixes.
Exactly.
So, let's start with those historical parallels then, because that's where things get really compelling, I think.
Agreed.
Perlin argues democracies often don't just collapse suddenly, right? It's more like an erosion from within.
Yeah, slow decay sometimes.
He uses the Roman Republic as a key example. You know, they had all these checks and balances meant to stop one person getting too powerful.
A system designed for stability, in theory.
But then, over time, wealth gets super concentrated, political violence becomes, well, almost normal. He mentions the Gracchus brothers being killed for pushing land reform.
Right. Those assassinations were a real turning point, showed that political violence was now on the table.
And then leaders like Julius Caesar come along and they figure out how to exploit the cracks in the system.
Populist figures using the dysfunction.
That moment, 49 BCE, Caesar crossing the Rubicon River, defying the Senate, Perlin presents that as pivotal.
Yeah, like the symbolic point of no return.
And by the time Caesar declares himself dictator for life, Perlin's saying the Republic was basically already gone. Not one big bang, but this gradual internal breakdown.
And connecting that to the bigger theme, what Perlin's getting at is just how fragile democratic institutions can be,
Mm.
even the ones that look strong on the surface.
Hmm.
That concentration of wealth sparking instability, political violence becoming acceptable, charismatic leaders exploiting divisions, these aren't new problems.
No, definitely not.
The Roman example is just a powerful reminder that, the threats from inside can be just as dangerous as any outside enemy.
And then he jumps to the 20th century, the Weimar Republic in Germany.
Yeah, and that's presented as this truly chilling example of how fast a democracy can just crumble.
You had the mess after World War I, the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty, that insane hyperinflation,
Millions felt hopeless, utterly disillusioned.
and into that chaos steps Adolf Hitler. Perlin makes a key point here. Hitler didn't initially use force to take over.
No, he used the democratic system itself, which is the terrifying part.
He used it to tear it down. His speeches tapped into all that anger and fear, and he pointed fingers scapegoats like Jews, communists, blaming them for everything.
A classic authoritarian playbook. Find an other to blame.
And the Reichstag fire in 33, Perlin highlights how Hitler used that fire as the excuse to just suspend basic civil rights.
Right, the Reichstag fire decree. And then the Enabling Act basically gave him dictatorial power.
It's a really stark lesson, isn't it, how democratic tools themselves can be turned into weapons against democracy.
It really is. And it forces you to ask, well, are we seeing similar weaknesses in our own system now? Perlin definitely thinks we should be asking that.
He certainly implies it strongly.
The Weimar example is just so unsettling because it shows a stable-looking democracy getting subverted from the inside when institutions get weak, when people fall prey to fear and scapegoating.
And when leaders are willing to exploit all of that.
Precisely.
Which brings us right up to the Trump era. The book sees it as, well, a major echo of these historical patterns.
Yes. Perlin isn't saying Trump invented these things, but that he used them very effectively. Divisive language, building intense loyalty, undermining democratic norms.
He points to things like Trump attacking the press, calling them the enemy of the people. Perlin sees that as a deliberate move to undermine the press's role in accountability.
A tactic common in authoritarian regimes, he argues, to discredit any independent source of information or criticism.
And also repeatedly dismissing court rulings. Perlin views that as showing a lack of respect for judicial independence, that check on executive power.
And what's key in Perlin's view is that these weren't just isolated incidents or like political gaffes.
No, he sees a pattern.
Yeah, part of a broader pattern of authoritarian behavior. Undermining institutions, demanding personal loyalty above all else, chipping away at norms. These tactics pop up again and again throughout history when authoritarianism is on the rise.
And then, of course, January 6th. That's presented as this incredibly stark example of how fragile democracy can become when it's under sustained attack.
Perlin doesn't see it as random. He sees it as the direct result of systematically eroding trust in elections.
Fueled by Trump's own rhetoric, his refusal to accept the loss.
Exactly. He argues it showed just how radicalized a part of the base had become, willing to actually act against the peaceful transfer of power for one person.
What's also kind of chilling is how Perlin describes the loyalty Trump commanded, even when faced with, impeachments, criminal charges, clear falsehoods.
Right. Instead of driving supporters away, those things often seemed to rally them, made them feel he was fighting a corrupt system for them.
Perlin draws a direct line there to historical authoritarians, where the leader's image, their narrative, becomes more important than the actual rule of law.
Yeah, and this is where the book really hits home, forcing you to look at these uncomfortable parallels between past democratic failures and recent U.S. history.
That use of fear, creating the us versus them dynamic, embracing conspiracy theories.
Perlin argues these were central to Trump's appeal, and they echo tactics used by figures like Hitler. And he throws in that sobering fact, over 40 million Germans supported Hitler and later had to live with the horrific consequences.
Wow. Yeah, that really makes you think.
It does.
Which leads us nicely into the power of fear and these conspiracy theories. Perlin calls fear the oldest tool of control.
Makes sense.
He says it bypasses our rational mind, hits our primal instincts, makes us want to run to authority, any authority, even a dangerous one.
And when fear gets weaponized, he argues, it's incredibly destructive. It breaks down trust, splits society apart, undermines democracy itself.
And when you mix fear with conspiracy theories, he basically calls it psychological warfare, getting people to act against their own interests based on a completely warped reality.
And he stresses this isn't new. He gives historical examples. Fear of barbarians in Rome used to justify military expansion. Fear of heresy in the Middle Ages, letting the church tighten its grip.
Even the Salem witch trials, how fear can just turn neighbors against each other.
Yeah. What's really key here is the link between fear and the story you tell about it. Fear needs a narrative.
Right, needs a focus.
And Perlin points to Hitler as a master of this, constructing the Jew as the ultimate enemy, blaming them for everything through nonstop propaganda and completely fabricated conspiracies.
These weren't just random lies, he says. They're carefully designed to play on existing fears and prejudices, create a common enemy, and unite a divided population against that enemy.
So, looking at the Trump era, Perlin sees a huge spike in this kind of conspiracy-driven politics.
Definitely, from the very beginning, with the whole birtherism thing against Obama.
Yeah, then claims climate change was a hoax, the deep state conspiracies. Trump seemed to, promote these ideas.
But Perlin argues the most dangerous was the Stop the Steal movement after the 2020 election, built on zero evidence of widespread fraud.
And he sees January 6th as the direct outcome of that specific conspiracy, an attack on the peaceful transfer of power itself.
He argues the power of these conspiracies wasn't logic, it was emotion. They offered easy answers to complex problems, easy scapegoats.
And they reinforced this idea that Trump was a victim who needed defending no matter what. Perlin then digs into the psychology a bit. Why do people fall for this stuff?
Yeah.
He mentions the appeal of feeling like you have secret knowledge, the comfort of finding order in chaos, even if it's a false order.
And how it builds tribal identity, that us versus them thing, again. Loyalty to the group, to the leader, becomes more important than facts.
And the consequences, massive. Breakdown of trust in institutions, deeper polarization makes it impossible to tackle real problems together.
Because democracy needs some shared sense of reality, right?
Exactly. Which fear and conspiracies are designed to destroy.
Okay, shifting slightly. Perlin also talks about the divisive potential of religion and nationalism.
Right. He acknowledges they meet a real human need for belonging, for purpose, identity. They offer big stories, answers to big questions.
But, and this is the key part, he warns that in the wrong hands, they become tools of control.
Uh-huh. Setting up hierarchies, demonizing the other, demanding total loyalty.
He really praises the Founding Fathers for separating church and state, specifically because they knew the history of religious wars in Europe.
They wanted to avoid that kind of conflict here.
And he gives examples of the Crusades, people killing in God's name, and Nazi Germany again, how Hitler blended Christian symbols with his Aryan myths.
Effectively using religion as a weapon against Jewish people.
So what's crucial for Perlin here is the need to see beyond those divisive religious doctrines.
Yeah, to embrace what he calls universal spiritual truths. This idea of interconnectedness, compassion.
Yeah.
He thinks that's at the heart of all genuine spirituality.
And he sees clinging to rigid, exclusive religious beliefs while ignoring that common ground as a major source of division.
Definitely.
Then he zooms in on what he calls America's Christian nationalism.
Right.
He sees that as potentially really dangerous.
How so?
He argues it can breed intolerance, turn political fights into like holy wars,
World Crusades.
and actually distort Christian teachings, swapping out love and humility for fear and judgment.
So he circles back to the importance of that church-state separation and looking past specific doctrines to a more inclusive spiritual understanding. Perlin keeps stressing that real spiritual awakening, according to mystics from all sorts of traditions, is about realizing we're all connected, transcending labels, cultivating compassion, unity.
He sees that as the antidote to the divisive side of religion and nationalism when they get twisted.
Makes sense. It's a powerful counter-narrative.
Next up, Perlin tackles what he calls the end times syndrome. This belief that seems to pop up again and again, that the world's about to end, that this specific time is the final chapter.
Right, that sense of impending doom, but also significance.
He suggests it often emerges when things feel uncertain, chaotic, and it gets exploited by people wanting power.
He traces it way back, Book of Daniel, Revelation in the Bible.
But also Hindu Kali Yuga, Norse Ragnarok, even secular societies have versions, right? Fear of climate collapse, AI takeover.
What they all share, he notes, is this duality. Acknowledging present chaos, but promising some kind of resolution, a new world after the destruction.
Which makes it appealing, especially in rough times.
Absolutely. And Perlin points to the 20th century world wars, Great Depression, the Cold War, the bomb, as super fertile ground for these end times stories.
He also mentions how political leaders can weaponize this thinking, like the Red Scare, using fear of an existential threat to consolidate power.
Yeah, invoking doom to justify actions.
Then he talks about what he calls this century's narcissism, seen in the rise of apocalyptic conspiracies like QAnon or the Great Reset.
These narratives that frame everything as being secretly controlled by, like, shadowy elites.
Exactly. He says it feeds paranoia, powerlessness. It taps into that human need to find meaning in chaos, but it's also used for manipulation, distracting from real systemic problems.
And he connects it to the COVID pandemic, how that became ripe for end times readings.
Yeah, like people saying temperature guns were the mark of the beast. Wild stuff.
He draws parallels between these modern fears and older prophecies like Revelation or Nostradamus, suggesting they reflect this enduring human pattern, fear leading to authoritarianism, division breaking society down.
He warns again about religious extremism twisting spiritual ideas into tools of control, and stresses how vital it is to tell truth from falsehood, choose understanding over fear.
Perlin's take on the end times thing feels really relevant now, doesn't it? With the constant flood of alarming news, conspiracy theories online, it's easy to feel like doom is just around the corner.
It really is. And his point about fear being exploited by power seekers is pretty critical.
Definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay, now let's really focus on what Perlin calls the rise of fascist rhetoric in modern America. He's arguing this doesn't just appear overnight.
No, it starts subtly often, playing on existing fears, creating divisions, slowly chipping away at democratic foundations.
He suggests it thrives when people feel uncertain, when they crave order in a world that feels out of control.
And those initial whispers, he warns, can grow into a really powerful force that reshapes politics and threatens institutions.
He's clear this isn't unique to one time or place, but he thinks in America today, it's found fertile ground, amplified by things like inequality, polarization.
And definitely social media echo chambers.
He gives examples of modern rhetoric like calling someone vaxxed or a traitor or telling them to wake up, sheep. He sees these as tactics to just shut down debate.
Yeah, silencing tools, reinforcing the us versus them. He even connects this to studies showing lower empathy in supporters of authoritarian leaders.
It's not just what's said, but the effect it's intended to have.
Exactly. Silencing dissent, dehumanizing opponents, making rational conversation almost impossible. He brings up Henry Wallace's warning from way back in 1944 about that dangerous mix of intolerance, deceit, and exploiting fear.
Perlin thinks that warning is incredibly relevant right now.
Seems like it.
He goes further, saying fear is the true architect of division, often covering up unhealed trauma that demagogues then exploit with easy answers and scapegoats.
And he draws that really uncomfortable parallel between Hitler's language about Jews and some language used more recently against immigrants, the press, political opponents.
Dehumanizing language. He also quotes Goebbels, repeat a lie often enough and it becomes truth, highlighting how repetition hammers these divisive ideas home.
He even brings up that old Vanity Fair story, claiming Trump kept a book of Hitler's speeches.
Right, my new order. And Trump denied it back in the 90s. Whether it's true or not, Perlin seems to use it to underline the danger, the potential influence of that kind of rhetoric.
Perlin's point is that this rhetoric isn't just politics. It gives people an identity.
How so?
By framing political fights as these huge existential struggles, it gives followers a sense of purpose, belonging, validates their anger, gives them a common enemy.
And the digital age just pours gasoline on that fire. Social media echo chambers. QAnon is his prime example of how fringe ideas can go mainstream online.
Absolutely.
Then he lists the real-world consequences. January 6th, the attack on Paul Pelosi, threats against election workers, that foiled plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer.
It's not just words, it has violent outcomes.
He argues division has always been a tool for autocrats. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and he includes Trump to grab and keep power.
And this division, he says, eats away at civil liberties. It breaks families apart, creates mistrust in communities, turns social media toxic.
Trust in institutions is at rock bottom, he notes. And he even says this division has a spiritual cost. It cuts us off from our shared humanity.
He wraps up that section saying the work of unity has to start with each of us, individually.
Yeah. This whole analysis of fascist rhetoric and its impact is really central to Perlin's whole argument, isn't it?
It really is. He's not just naming a problem. He's showing how it works today, using history, psychology, and pointing to the real dangers it poses to democracy.
Which leads us into part 2 of the book, Project Reunification, a blueprint for hope.
Right. And he explicitly frames this as a counter-proposal to something called Project 2025, which he clearly sees as pushing America in a very different authoritarian direction.
So Project Reunification aims to put compassion, dialogue, informed participation back at the center.
Yeah, those are the core principles. Embrace inclusivity, actively fight hate and fear, promote integrity, uphold secularism.
And from those big ideas, he gets into very specific policy proposals across a whole bunch of areas.
It's really comprehensive. It covers so many interconnected parts of society. He moves methodically from the big principles to concrete policy suggestions.
Okay, let's touch on some key areas. Education.
He wants a major curriculum overhaul focused on equality, inclusion, justice, plus anti-discrimination training for teachers, fair school funding, and importantly, stopping book bans.
Institutional protections.
Strengthening civil rights laws, enforcing equal opportunity, supporting marginalized groups, appointing judges who uphold civil rights,
Secular values.
defending that church-state separation wall, keeping religion out of public policy, public awareness campaigns, protecting religious freedom in public institutions, but also promoting interfaith dialogue.
Checks and balances. This is a big one.
Yeah. Term limits for everyone in power, including the Supreme Court, getting big money out of politics, ending presidential immunity from criminal charges, ensuring judges are impartial, holding officials accountable for their rhetoric, reforming elections, maybe even getting rid of the filibuster.
Wow, okay. What about people's health and well-being?
Expand Medicaid, lower drug prices, support affordable health care access, uphold and even enhance student debt reliefs, ensure access to quality education, maybe subsidized college, protect intellectual freedom in schools and research,
And environment.
expand climate rules, push clean energy, create green jobs, invest in new tech for environmental protection, aim for a pollution-free environment,
Science.
fund research across the board, climate, health, tech, space, psychology, genetics, foster international collaboration, protect scientific integrity from politics,
Diversity and inclusion.
nationwide campaigns, eliminate discrimination, strengthen civil rights laws again, promote fair housing.
He also has a section called Honoring the Feminine. What's that about?
Recognizing feminine principles, he says. But practically, protecting women's reproductive rights, reforming the Supreme Court, stopping new challenges, honoring Roe v. Wade,
Caring for the elderly.
protect Social Security, but also expand support beyond it, create community service roles for seniors, improve access to health and wellness, better elder care,
Protecting youth.
common sense gun laws, stronger background checks, waiting periods, restricting high-capacity magazines,
And global peace.
prioritize diplomacy, keep treaties, seek diplomatic solutions first, transparency in military spending, educate people on the dangers of America first, isolationism, support other democracies, hold officials accountable if they undermine peace efforts. He also bundles some things under progressive pillars supporting all family types: child welfare, parental leave, government transparency, participatory governance, international cooperation, humane immigration, sustainable national security, social and economic rights. It's a lot.
It really is a sweeping vision.
But Perlin stresses it's not just about passing laws. It requires individual action, too. Strengthening democratic institutions from the ground up, fighting disinformation, promoting media literacy, getting involved in grassroots movements.
Rekindling civic duty to push back against authoritarianism.
Exactly. He compares this moment to other crisis points in U.S. history, like the Civil War or the Civil Rights Movement, times of renewal. And he emphasizes that the health of American democracy matters globally.
And he always brings it back to that need for a universal spiritual vision, something that unites us beyond the divisions, recognizing our shared humanity.
That's the thread running through the whole project.
Which flows right into his section on restoring America's mystical destiny. This is where it gets a bit more esoteric.
A little, yeah. He explores the idea that America has this deeper spiritual purpose beyond just politics. He mentions Manly P. Hall viewing America as a kind of new Atlantis.
He looks at whether esoteric traditions influence the founders, the symbolism on the Great Seal, the eye, the unfinished pyramid, suggesting hints of a higher purpose.
But he makes a crucial point. Leaders just reflect the collective consciousness of the people.
So the responsibility is on everyone.
Right. What's needed, he argues, is a spiritual revolution, a collective wake-up call to how interconnected we all are.
And he suggests actions. Embrace universal spirituality over dogma. Promote ethical leaders. Be conscious citizens, critical thinking. Educate for a new era, emotional intelligence, media literacy. Push for economic justice, UBI, corporate accountability.
And he even says don't underestimate the power of small individual acts of kindness and empathy. They add up. They shift the collective vibe.
So connecting the political and the spiritual very directly.
Very much so.
Then, in the home stretch, he directly tackles countering the threat of fascism in modern America.
Yes, he brings Project 2025 back up, arguing it mirrors early stages of historical fascism.
What aspects specifically?
Things like centralizing power in the executive, undermining the judiciary, attacking the media, suppressing opposition, weaponizing conspiracy theories.
And he positions his Project Reunification principles as the direct antidote.
Exactly. Strengthening institutions, promoting truth, fostering dialogue, protecting liberties. These are the counterweights.
He makes a big plea for voting here, right, as the fundamental way to protect democracy.
Absolutely. Reject extremism, embrace unity and shared values. And he calls for more media accountability, stronger rules against disinformation, restore journalistic integrity.
Okay, so let's try to recap the main takeaways from this deep dive into Perlin's The Reunited States of America.
We've looked at his historical analysis, how democracies can decline from within. We've seen the dangers he highlights around division, fear-mongering.
And then we explored his whole Project Reunification vision, that detailed blueprint for a path towards, well, a more united, just future grounded in these spiritual principles.
And for you, the learner, hopefully this discussion gave you a solid framework for understanding the sheer complexity of American polarization.
And maybe some ideas about potential ways forward.
Right. Perlin offers both that historical context, how do we get here,
Yeah.
and a whole range of specific proposals for where we could go. Hopefully, that provided some of those aha moments and a clearer view of the challenges, but also the possibilities.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Perlin argues pretty forcefully that restoring America's mystical destiny needs more than just politics and policy. It needs a spiritual awakening, a real recognition of how connected we all are.
Hmm.
So think about this. How might genuinely embracing that sense of shared humanity beyond all the political labels and fights, how might that fundamentally change how we tackle the huge challenges facing the country?
And maybe even what small individual actions could each of us take consciously that might actually contribute to that bigger spiritual reunification he's talking about.
Great questions.
This deep dive, it's really just kicking off a bigger conversation. We definitely encourage you to check out the Reunited States of America yourself. Think more about the ideas, the proposals we talked about today.
Yeah, what parts really clicked with you? What questions do you still have?
Because this journey towards understanding, towards unity, it's ongoing, isn't it? And your engagement, your thinking about these big ideas, it's absolutely vital.